Hello, coders. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It is episode 208 of the How to Code Well podcast, and the date is the 24th of November. So that means we're very close to Christmas. Today, I want to talk about the PHP job market. I want to talk about some announcements of what we've been getting up to with How to Code Well. There's some of the tutorials that we've been doing, some work that I've been in partnership with a sponsor, and also I want to do an explainer on HTTP requests to discuss what they are. First of all, let's talk about what's happened with How to Code Well recently, and there's a lot to talk about here because we've managed to do an awful amount of tutorials, and it's November has been an incredibly busy month. We've done if I go over to the browser in it here, right, we have done a tutorial in November on how to change PHP INI settings, what is a database schema, getting started with continual integration and continual delivery using GitHub Actions. We've done a tutorial on what is a database. And then the tutorials within October, well, at the start of October, were written right at the end of October. So we have when to use a PHP switch or if match statements. We've got a tutorial on how to concatenate PHP strings, a tutorial on building and deploying your first Laravel API. Do we have any more tutorials? If I click on more here. No. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tutorials that have been created. Probably in the last, I would say, 4 weeks. It's been incredibly busy. And a lot of these tutorials come with videos as well. So I've been doing some work with a sponsor, Cloudways. And they asked me to create tutorials where I would be demonstrating something to do with PHP, let's say, and also demonstrating how to use their Cloudways VPSs. And so I decided to use that as an opportunity to focus on Laravel applications, Laravel tutorials. So we created one first on, published it on October the 28th, build and deploy your first Laravel API. And that's using the API platform, discussing how to build the API, and then how to deploy it to the Cloudways VPS. And then we did one which is create a Laravel bash deploy script. So that was using the Laravel API that we created in the first tutorial and then deploying that to a Cloudways VPS using bash, right? So using bash and SSH. Then after that, I did the third one for Cloudways, which is getting started with continual integration and continual delivery using GitHub Actions. This one was so fun to do. I love it when I have the opportunity to actually use tools like this, especially if someone is sponsoring me to do the stuff as well, because it was, and I must say Cloudways was great because they gave me like basically a free reign. It was like, do whatever you want, build whatever you want, just mention Cloudways, do it on a Cloudways VPS. And I've used Cloudways before since doing all of this stuff, so I was very happy to do it. And I was able to pick the DigitalOcean, or I did stuff using the AWS VPSs, and I done stuff using Linode VPSs as well, all on the Cloudways dashboard. So that was pretty cool. And then having this working with GitHub Actions was fantastic. So with the Laravel API that we had created in the first tutorial and then created the build script for it in the second tutorial, the third tutorial, this one, was how to use continual integration using things like PHP Stan. I'll just open it here. Using things like PHP Stan. So we used, how to install PHP Stan, how to configure PHP Stan, how to run PHP Stan locally, how to run PHP unit locally, how to create GitHub Actions, configuring the VPS, how to set up SSH, deploying the Laravel API with GitHub, and then the CI/CD GitHub Actions workflow. And this tutorial, you have to remember, like these tutorials, they're not just like, here's a video. I'm actually documenting the whole process. So you can actually use this tutorial and see the GitHub actions. And so this is the same with all of the tutorials. The documentation behind all of these are all available. So this is the GitHub action here. This is how, a discussion on how to configure the VPS, how to set up SSH. It's great. And then the full GitHub workflow behind, and then how to deploy using SSH. So it was essentially you would commit the code, and then continually integration would run. That would then do the merge, and then it would deploy that once all the things were good to the VPS. Fantastic. And I, again, really like that kind of stuff. And then after that, we did how to change the PHP ini settings in a Cloudways VPS, which is more to do with the Cloudways itself, because it's a managed service. And there are ways to configure PHP ini on Cloudways through their fairly straightforward, easy to use control panel, which I found, really good to use. So that was fun. And it was one of those, we need to get this out the door very quickly, these 4 tutorials. And then I was thinking, and then because I like to make things more difficult for myself, I thought, well, I don't want to have just the tutorial section of howtocodewell.net just be Cloudways. There kind of needs to be other tutorials as well. I don't want to just be a mouthpiece, right? So I created how to concatenate strings tutorial, how to use, this was fun, when to use PHP switch or if match statements, right? So this is comparing the switch statement with a match statement and an if statement. And yeah, so I've done a lot of writing in the last month, right? It's been so fun. And then I created these explainers, what is a database schema, what is a database. There's another one going up soon, which will be on the Patreon stuff and on the YouTube member stuff, which is about API first. And this one here was how to concatenate strings as well using PHP, the various different ways you can do it in PHP, which was very interesting. And I find that I work best when I write these things. I find that when it is very early in the morning, that is when I work my best in terms of writing stuff. And I'm really getting into the writing and using howtocodewell.net as the platform to do all of these things. And then, of course, as I've hinted earlier, there is what I'm doing is putting all of these on Patreon first, as well as the YouTube membership, and then putting them public or publishing them several weeks after. And so if you wanted to get all of these tutorials before anybody else, then and support the show, then do consider Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. And of course, YouTube members get the ability to chat on the live streams. So that was fun. So that's what we've been doing. And then, of course, I've been pushing out, whilst that's been going on, pushing out the podcast as well. And also another update is the Linux Bash for Beginners course, which is this one here. I have documented all of the tutorials bar the last one, so the last one I documented was how to source a file using the Linux command line. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. I just realized how small the screen is. And then the next one is how to display disk usage using the Linux command line. So yeah, we've got the content on this site is getting quite big, which is pretty cool. So we've got PHP, MySQL, Linux Bash for Beginners, PHP CLI, PHP Strings for Beginners, HTML for Beginners, Docker for Beginners. These are the courses that you can purchase on howtocodewell.net. There is, as you can probably see, there are lots of little bugs and UI things that I need to do and fix around the site. Sure, it's one of these things that it's a work in progress, shall we say. It's a work in progress. And as I mentioned, I think a couple of times, I'm going to be creating a membership thing for this as well. So with the tutorials, what I would love to have is let's say I click on one of these tutorials here at the bottom. I've gone and made this super big, that's why it looks a bit funky. Right at the bottom, I want to have comments, and I want only members to be able to comment on the thing. I also want the ability, when you log in to howtocodewell.net, to be able to bookmark and to create your own learning journey, and for it to intelligently know what content you've seen, what content in terms of the courses, if you're on, say, the 5th tutorial of a 20 tutorial series, that kind of stuff, to then be able to intelligently recommend the different content for you. And, you've seen this podcast, and this podcast, we talked about this. So perhaps you might be interested in watching a tutorial on that, or, maybe you want to see more to do with Docker and that kind of stuff. There is lots in the background. A recommendation engine is essentially what I'm trying to say is that, but only for, the members kind of area. Anyway, anywho, there's enough of that. So this has been a very busy month indeed, and going forward it's going to be busy too. However, saying that, I do hope that at some point, because you have to remember, I'm doing all of this in my spare time, and I've taken some time. This is obviously a huge amount of work, so I've taken time off to do this. But it's getting to the point now where I need to get back into the contracting space. And so I've started to have a look at what contracts are available. I am a full stack dev. I primarily, as you can probably tell, work with PHP. And I'm a little bit concerned about the PHP job market. And that's something that I wouldn't mind discussing today, because I've got these sites up here. So I use a whole array of websites when it comes to finding myself a contract job. And it's not just the websites, it's also having the knowledge and the network of decent recruitment agents to contact. So what I'm going to show you now is just kind of the higher level, the sites that everybody would know, right? But there are specific sites, say if I was to have a good network of recruitment agents that I have, right? They have their own sites, and those sites will have their own search engines on there. But from a higher level, you've got things like, this is the IT job board. You've also got CW Jobs, and then Monster. But there's loads of others, right? So there's Indeed, there's Reed. Just trying to think of some off the top of my head. CV Library. There's a whole array of different different job sites that you can use. And then when you go down to actually speaking to a recruitment agent, they usually have their own website with their own applications on there, right? And then obviously you speak to the recruitment agent. And the way the last few jobs that I've recently had, they have been applications that weren't ever on any of the sites. They were recruitment agents calling me up saying, "Hey, Pete, we have this role and it needs to go live, or it's going live in the next couple of weeks. Do you fancy a stab at the interview? I can put you forward. What is your availability and other details, shall we say?" So I haven't really used these in a while. That's what I'm trying to say here. But I'm very weirded out by the amount or the lack of PHP jobs that are available for contractors. And I know that we have to take it into consideration that this is a weird time of the year anyway, right? So if you take November as a snapshot in all years, in the past 20 years, November has been a bit of an awkward one, right? Because we are coming to the end of the year. So usually what happens is all the budgets have either been decided before now, right? And all of the staff are have already been in position, ready for the handover that's going to happen in December, because the shutdown, I should say, ready for the shutdown. So finding a job in November is weird. You usually look for jobs for the new year in November and December, sure. But even that is, I can remember several years ago where the PHP jobs were just there in November, there in December and January. You have to take into consideration that this is a quiet time of year, sure, but when you see no PHP jobs available, that is a concern. And so what I've got to demonstrate here is like this one has this job board, IT job board. If I search for PHP, right, like this, and then do find jobs, so there's certainly jobs available. But look, we've got 2023, 2022. What's going on here, right? What's going on here? These jobs are old jobs, 2021, and then we got 2024. So these are sponsored, which I guess is the green thing. I wish they would just get rid of all of this stuff. This is just, it's so infuriating when you have to go through all of this noise. And then you scroll down here. Okay, yeah, so we've got some jobs, 2024. Okay, great. That's fine. But if I scroll down, there's 27 contracting positions, 5 jobs found. And again, this is all old, 2018. And then here, 2024. So we've got a few hybrid working, .NET. I mean, why? Why is this? Just because you've said PHP, that .NET mids, so that can't happen. Then this is Java, that can't happen. That's Python and Java. Do you see what I'm getting at? People are starting to just put PHP down as a keyword in their applications, and they're not actually needing them. So that's a waste of time. Okay, so then we have a look at this one. This is CW jobs, and I've looked for PHP. Let's just get rid of that. PHP, and do we have, if we scroll down here, we don't even have an option for contracting. There's usually an option down here for contracting. Nothing. And what's with 8 work from home jobs and 12 permanent jobs? What's going on there? What is going on? Monster jobs. All right. So we go PHP. Fine. Let's do that again. And we have a look at, these are not contracts. Can I do filter? I want contract. I want to review results. And that's still not. And you can tell it says full-time. And then here, full-time remote. So no. Like, what? Okay, what's this? 15 days ago. I don't really know what any of this is. I'll need to have a look at it. So MySQL, MongoDB, Redis, Kalefa, and Elastic. Okay, PHP and Symfony. Yeah, that sounds like one. But do you see what I mean? It's like really few and far between. Test engineer. And then you go to the actual recruitment sites. I won't go to one, but let's say you found an actual recruitment agent. You go to their site and they have 0 on there. And it's a bit disconcerting. It's very disconcerting for there's certainly stuff. If I was to change this to say JavaScript, right? So this is the job board again. See, boom. Contract. Yeah, there's still a bunch in here. And then we could do the same. We could compare, say, Python in here. Let's search for that. This is on CW. Scroll all the way down. There is 28 contract jobs for Python. And, reasonable amounts, right? What's... So where is all of the PHP jobs? What's going on? Does this mean... Now, I certainly don't think PHP is going away, but I do think that this is a little bit alarming. PHP is certainly there's certainly going to be PHP jobs in the future, obviously. But when you see it like this, then it's a little bit... It does get you a little bit concerned, I think. What does everybody else think? If you're able to chat and you've got thoughts on this, on the PHP job market, then please do let me know. I'll be interested to know what your thoughts are. And I keep getting called by recruitment agents asking me if I know of any of anything, which is a bit weird. Yeah, so I'll keep you posted. Yesterday I applied for, I think it was 5 jobs. Today I applied for 2. And I think I'm just going to keep plowing on in the next few days. I'm just going to keep applying for roles. I actually applied one yesterday for a job, and they wanted, it was labeled as it was titled as a front end developer, and yet the spec had nothing to do with front end. It was all back end stuff, which was centered around PHP, which was fantastic. So whether they mistitled it or not, I have no idea. It wasn't even anything to do with full stack, the title. It was front end UI engineer or something like that. And I clicked it, and just because, you know, I was getting frustrated that there was nothing else that said back-end engineer or PHP developer, and so I thought, okay, I'll just have a look and see what the grass is like on the other side. Clicked it, and lo and behold, they wanted back-end stuff rather than front-end stuff. So whoever wrote that needs to, you know, maybe I'm going to get lucky with that. I don't know, but anyway. Yes, so the job market is a bit dire. Now, what are my thoughts on the reasonings for this? Let's get back into this mode. What is my reasonings as to why the PHP job market is a bit weird? And you've got to also consider that JavaScript, PHP, Python, and .NET, they're also suffering as well. So there must be something that is not quite just to do with PHP. And I put it down to what's going on in the world. There's a lot of uncertainty. There has been a lot of uncertainty, especially in the UK, around what Keir Starmer is going to be doing with the budget. Of course, that happened not so long ago, and not a lot of people are happy about what's happening. And then, of course, you've got the wars going on. You've got Ukraine, and you've got Russia, and you've got things going on in the Middle East. And everyone's a little bit unsure as to when they should be pulling the trigger on some of these jobs, right? When they should actually be releasing them. And then, of course, on top of all of this, you've got the US elections that have happened, and then the complete and utter uncertainty as to what is going to happen within the next month or so, between when Biden goes and Trump joins. Takes power, and then what on earth that looks like after it. So I think we're in a bit of a bumpy ride, and it sounds bonkers and weird, but actually all of those things have an effect on the job market, and it's a broad brush. It's just because PHP, I think, is more of a niche kind of programming language, because you've got, are you a Laravel developer? Are you a Symfony developer? Are you Drupal? Are you Magento? You know, are you WordPress? That kind of stuff. There's lots of like little niches for PHP, whereas with Python, it's, are you a data scientist? Are you into AI? There isn't really any kind of web-based focused programming kind of roles out there. It's more like, this is you're a back-end engineer, you do Python, in my opinion. So, and then with JavaScript, because JavaScript is so broad, it's like, well, do you build mobile apps, or do you build things on the server, you know, or do you do any kind of front-endy stuff? And then that goes in with UI. So those kind of programming languages have other areas to bolster themselves up, whereas PHP, I think, it's more focused on, do you do Magento, do you do Laravel, do you do Symfony? You know, because if I was to apply for a Laravel job and not have my CV reflecting that I was a Laravel developer, and it was just a Symfony developer, then people wouldn't particularly notice me. I've had these discussions before with recruitment agents where I just say, look, man, I'm a PHP dev. You know, put me in front of Yi, put me in front of Laravel, put me in front of Symfony. I will do the work. It doesn't matter. I've worked on Drupal, Magento, all kinds of crazy things. WordPress, yeah. it's PHP at the end of the day, but when it comes to the actual job spec, they want you to narrow it down, niche it down into like, you're a Laravel developer, you're a Symfony developer, that kind of stuff. Whereas I think with Python, it's a little bit more broader, and with JavaScript as well. If you do React, you can also do Vue, and it's just JavaScript at the end of the day. And then of course you got TypeScript on top of that. If you're a JavaScript developer, taking on TypeScript, it really isn't that difficult either. And if you are a TypeScript developer, you can certainly do JavaScript, right? So anyway, enough of that. That's a bit ranty. So let's move on. Right. I would like to do an explainer on what is a HTTP request. So a HTTP request. We're only going to focus on requests. We're not going to focus on responses. I think I'm going to do that in a separate video, because HTTP requests don't always get the attention I think they need. It's usually responses, because responses are cool because they've got the error codes and everything, and some of the fancy error codes like I'm a teapot and all that jazz. So today I want to focus on just what is a HTTP request. Okay, let me just grab a sip of water. Okay, what is a HTTP request? A HTTP request is a message sent by a client to a server. A client could be a browser or other devices on a network that send API requests. So this could be, it's not just your browser, right? It could be an API. It could be IoT. It could be your light bulbs, right? It could be things that are fired from webhooks. It could be stuff that is done through devices that are in your home that send requests to servers using HTTP. It could be things to check the status of whether things are up or not, checking if things are still running. So it is a message. A HTTP request is a message, and it's sent by a client. The client doesn't have to be a browser, although that's what typically people think, right? So it's a browser, you refresh the page, and that's doing a request to the server, and then that will respond with the web page. But it doesn't have to be a browser. That's the point. It doesn't have to be the browser. It could be anything. It could be anything, really. IoT stuff, devices, mobile phones. When you're doing real-time checks, it could be sending API requests to external sources, those kind of bits and pieces. Okay, so a client could be a browser or other devices on a network that send API requests. The structure of a HTTP request is made from 3 parts. This is important. The 3 parts that make up a HTTP request. The first is the header. The second one is the request line. And thirdly, we have the optional body. Okay, I'm going to break these up. So the header of a request can contain, or does contain, key value pairs that provide additional information about the request. This is kind of like metadata about the request. Examples of the header could be the host, the user agent, the content type, and the authorization. And the purpose of a HTTP header is to control the behavior of the request and provide information about the client. So when we send a request off, we usually include things like, where was the request sent from, right? So what is the browser? What is the user agent? What is the version of the browser that we're using? Or what is the API that it was sent from? What was the referrer? The user agent will have things like your browser, the browser version, and it could also be like this was a request from an API. The content type will be the type of content that we are requesting. Am I requesting an image, or am I requesting text? the authorization, which probably needs to have a whole bunch of episodes just to talk about authorization with APIs, will be any form of key or credentials that allow the request to be to access the resource. Now I'm going to be using the word resource quite a lot, right? Accessing the resource. So when we run a HTTP request, people think, okay, we're just requesting a web page, but in actual fact, we're requesting a resource, right? We're requesting a resource, and that resource could be behind authorization that we need to gain access from. And when we do that, we might gain a key, and that key we then give or include with our future requests, and then perhaps we refresh that key when it gets expired. I don't really want to go down the authorization and access control route today, but maybe we will at some point. The request line, then, if we talk about the request line, is broken up into further sections. So we have the method. This is the method in which the request. This is the method that we have requested. Okay. The path that the request was made from, that's wrong. The path in which the request is made to. Okay. And of course the HTTP version, because there's various different HTTP versions. So that's the request line. So the request line includes the method used by the request, the path that the request is going to, as well as the HTTP version. All right. So the method is actually quite a big thing, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6 different types of methods here. So we're going to talk about each one. The method defines the requested action that is to be performed by the server. Okay, so I'm going to give you a HTTP request. This request perhaps includes a payload, and I would like to access this path. And that is the request path, right? With this payload, and perhaps I want to update a record on a database or somewhere else. And so in the payload, I include perhaps the ID of the resource that I want to update. Or maybe I want to delete it. And so I pass in the method of delete instead of put or post or get or head or options. These are the methods. Okay, so we'll go through each one. The first one, which is the most common, is get. This is where your HTTP request wants to get a resource from the server. Okay, where your client wants to get a resource from the server. This is the most common one because this, of course, is when you refresh a page, you will be getting the resource from the server, i.e. the HTML code. Okay, but you have to consider that when you refresh a page on a browser, you might be, or you will be, doing multiple HTTP requests to that site. We won't talk about cache efficiency today, but again, that's we could we could do a whole episode on that perhaps. So a GET request is getting. I'll read it word for word. GET resource is to be retrieved from the server. I would like to retrieve this thing from the server, please. Okay, the next one is post. This is the next most common one, which is a post request. Okay, so this is a resource is to be processed on the server. So this is where, typically, this is where I want to create something on the server, right? So I want to give you some data that perhaps creates a record in the database or in something else, right? Or I'm giving you the dimensions of an image that I want you to rescale, right? And crop and all of that stuff. So I'm giving you something and I want you to process that. Usually that is in a creation rather than a modification, because when we start talking about put request, that's changing an existing resource. However, I have seen this being used. I've seen all of these being confused, right? So I've seen post requests that should be. I've seen get requests that really should be post requests. I've seen where we get something off of the server, but we're actually doing a bit of processing, behind the scenes. I've seen things where we're actually doing a post request where we actually should be doing a put, because there is already an existing resource on the server that needs to be processed. So a put request here, again, word for word here, put existing resources to be updated on the server. So this is existing. This is a resource that currently already exists. And say, for example, maybe I'm just changing the title of this record. And so what I would do is I would supply in the payload the new title as well as the ID of the record, and then that would be updated, and the return response would tell me whether that resource has been updated via the put request. But I've seen this done using post requests before. You can, sure, definitely don't do that with a get request, but it's good practice to use these methods. So gets resource, post resource is to be processed on the server, put is an existing resource to be updated on the server. The next one, is delete. So this is where we're deleting a resource from the server. And again, I've seen deletions using post requests and put requests and even get requests. So when we delete something from the server, that is a delete method. So this is this path. Maybe I'm saying API /product / and then the ID of the product using a delete request, and then that would delete the product with the ID that's in the query string, but maybe that should be in the payload. We'll get to the payload in a minute. The next one is a head. So this is only returning the response headers, right? So it's not returning anything else. These are typically quite quick, right? So maybe this could be used for things like checking the health of something. Am I still up? Is this server still running? Is this resource still there? So this will just return the response headers, which will have your response code in it. We won't talk about those today. We will talk about those eventually in another episode, the error codes and the HTTP response codes and whatnot, because there are a whole bunch of them. But the next one is options. So this is going to describe the options of the target resource. Okay, so what options are available to me? This is probably the less frequently used, the options one. Usually it's more to do with things like APIs, but knowing these methods are really important, and it's so important not to confuse these as well, especially if you think you are doing a get but you're actually doing a delete. Don't do that. That's just silly. Don't do that at all. And if you can, please avoid using puts to create anything. That should be a post, and likewise try and avoid using posts to update resources, update your data. That really should be a put request. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the body of the HTTP request. This is the payload, right? This is the thing that you supply up to the server in your request, alongside the method and the request line and whatnot. So this is the body of the HTTP request. It is completely and utterly optional. And of course, the body can be written in a whole manner of different ways, right? So it doesn't have to be JSON. It could be XML. It could be just plain text, right? It could be a blob from an image or some asset or something like that. So the HTTP body contains the payload of the request, which could also include things like forms and files and JSON data, right? Typically, this is for post requests or put requests. Okay, so when loading a web page, the browser is making a GET request. a get HTTP request. The server which responds with the HTML. JavaScript and CSS is then used to display the page. And of course, all of those are get requests. Get me the JavaScript, get me the CSS, all of those things. And you'll see in your developer toolbar, if some of those resources don't exist, then the server is going to return you back certain status codes. Again, really don't want to get into the status codes, but let's say, for example, the resource doesn't work, isn't there, can't be found. Then we will get a 404, right? 404, resource cannot be found. So your page might actually work. However, parts of the page, the assets, let's say, may fail. And so I just got a message on Twitter before we went live here, where actually the favicon on howtocodewell.net doesn't exist. As you can tell, I've been building this pretty quick. So I will have to look at that in a minute. But that is an example where we have, in fact, let me go over to the browser. I can actually show you what's going on with this. Let's do some live debugging, shall we? So if we go to view and we go to developer tools, I would imagine, and we probably need to refresh this page here. 3 messages. Is this 3 warnings? One of these, some of these should tell me that there is a, is it that one? No, it's not. Okay, probably not a great idea to do this live, but there is a missing favicon. You can see there, that's missing. So, and there's other issues and stuff. I probably shouldn't be doing this live, but let's quickly go back to the talking. Yes, so this would come back as a 404 error, and the 404 will say that this resource cannot be found. We're trying to access the favicon. There's other things as well. Let's say, for example, one of the hey, here we go. I finally got it. Let's get back to the browser. Yeah, can you see this here where it says get https howtocodewell.net/favicon.ico 404 not found? That is a resource. And that resource cannot be found. However, the page itself is displayed. Right, so it's displaying with whatever resources are available that have been requested. This resource doesn't exist, or cannot be found. It does exist, but it just can't be found at this path. So let's just go into. Can I go into? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. What you say, for example, this was an API. You could perhaps go into a little bit more detail as to the actual response that was coming back. Maybe the response code was a 400, and so that was a bad argument, and that would, you may have some human readable message there, or a message to say what it was that you can't get to. So here we go. I've isolated this now. Yeah. So that is, here we go. And you can see where in the code that it was called. There's other JavaScript stuff in here as well. You know, these are all resources. That's a resource going to the cookie consent. This is there's other resources for the app CSS. Tons of stuff. Okay, so the point there is that your website, when you do a GET request to get to the website, you're also going to do a whole bunch of other requests to get the resources for that. Each of these images, for instance, is a resource. Now, that can get quite weighty if you've got lots of images, and that's where caching comes in. Again, we won't discuss that today. We probably should at some point talk about how to cache. Maybe I'll do like an explainer of like certain ways we can do caching, because they all have advantages and disadvantages. Anyway, let's get back to this. So when I started writing this, I then started thinking, well, when was the first HTTP request made? You know, when was the first time that someone did a HTTP request? I found a little bit of information. So I've got down here, the first HTTP request was made in the context of the World Wide Web, okay, which Sir Tim Berners-Lee developed at CERN, which is the European Organization for Nuclear Research in Switzerland. The first successful HTTP request transaction occurred in 1990. This initial version of HTTP was very basic and was later termed HTTP version 0.9. And then I thought, well, okay, that's cool. That's when the first HTTP request was properly recorded. But how many HTTP requests do you think run every year, right? And so I did a little quick off of the fact packet, kind of off of an envelope calculation. And this is incredibly conservative, because in the previous example I showed you that a website has multiple requests. It's not just one single request, right? So if everybody made only 500 HTTP requests per day, which is an obscenely lower number, right? Completely conservative number there, right? If everybody made 500 HTTP requests per day, the year total of HTTP requests would be in the trillions. And then I've got here, this is obviously a very conservative estimate when considering the number of IoT devices, mobile devices, and real-time services such as social media. Every time you refresh your social media, you want to get that extra dopamine hit. That's doing a request to see if you've got any more notifications. Okay, so mobile devices and real-time services such as social media, the number of HTTP requests made per year is probably within the ballpark of many quadrillions. That is an insane amount to think about. And that's almost like staring into the matrix. Just imagine looking at all of the access logs for all of the HTTP requests. You would never be able to keep up, ever be able to keep up with all of that stuff. So again, this is where caching can really help your sites. Luckily, I don't necessarily need to worry about that. Unluckily, I suppose. It's one of those problems. It's a nice problem to have if you've got incredible amounts of traffic on your good traffic. There's bad traffic as well, obviously. So yeah, that is what is a HTTP request, broken down into the various different aspects of a HTTP request. I don't feel that HTTP requests get treated like first-class citizens a lot. I think people normally tend to focus their times on the responses, so they don't really bother with what is a get versus post versus put versus delete versus head versus options, and what is the point in the HTTP versions and all of that stuff, because that's not the sexy part of it. The sexy part of it is the responses. And then you've got silly things like the error response codes that can have daft response codes that mean weird things, that kind of stuff. So we'll probably get into that maybe the next podcast, or maybe the next one. Who knows? The next video. Right. Anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. I'm going to shoot off now. It is Storm Bert has caused a bit of havoc where I live, and it's a nice rainy day, which means that I get to play Magic the Gathering and do some Warhammer painting and watch some films in my pajamas. So I'm obviously not in my pajamas right now, but I will be very soon. Happy coding, everybody, and I'll see you again next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.